When, many centuries ago, the Emperor Ashoka sent those two arahants, Sona and Uttara, from India to Burma, the prediction made by his teacher was that this land, Burma, in those days it was called Suvarna Bhumi, land of gold, could keep this gem of Dhamma, practice and theory, for centuries. And then 2,500 years after the death of Buddha, when the practice had been lost everywhere else in the world, Burma could then return this gem to India, where it would be established and spread around the world. And the man who did that was our teacher, Goenka. In this little talk, this 1-hour talk, it will be completely impossible to do justice to this monumental achievement and to all the events, vicissitudes, and achievements of his life. So this little talk will cover only his early years, his childhood, his training under Sayagyi, and the establishment of Dhamma in India. It will end when he leaves India to spread Dhamma in the West. Now, of course, Goenka was an Indian, and yet he was born in Burma. Now, why was that? It was all due to this man, his grandfather, whom he called Baba, and whom Goenka had a very close relationship with the first 8 years of his life. About 150 years ago, Baba, then a young man, left his native town of Churu in Rajasthan, seeking a better livelihood somewhere else. He travelled by camel and by foot across the Rajasthan desert to Bikaner. Then he took a train to Calcutta. There were people he knew in Calcutta, but something drove him further. He broke an ancient Hindu taboo. The Puranas, the sacred scripts of India, said that Hindus should not travel by sea. He travelled by sea. He took a boat across to Burma, to Rangoon, made his way up to Mandalay and settled there. He was one, at that time, of a trickle of Indians going to Burma. That trickle later became a flood. By the 1930s, many years later, there were over 1 million Indians living in Burma, 7% of the population, and half of the population of Rangoon. But this was early days, and he was something of a pioneer. Nor was he a rich person. He traded in textiles, probably buying them in Rangoon, selling them in Mandalay, and then going up by horseback to the upper district, to the Shan district, and there he would go from market town to market town. Mostly they had their markets, their bazaars on different days, so he would travel between them on horseback or by foot. He was a strict vegetarian, so probably for these trips of 20 or 30 days, he carried his own food with him, just pickled vegetables, dried rotis. When he needed water, he'd use his big turban and drop his container into the wells, drink water that way, and sleep in public rest houses or public platforms. It was a hard life. But he prospered, and sooner or later, he was able to start a shop in Mandalay, and that was the beginning of the whole Goenka family business. He had 3 sons, and they had children, and one of them, of course, was Goenka. So this young Goenka actually became quite close to Baba. He used to read him the newspaper in the afternoon, a habit which Goenka kept for the rest of his life. And the family, as we know, was a staunch conservative Hindu family, but Baba was different. He didn't like going to the Hindu temples, and he used to go to the Mahamuni temple, where that beautiful statue of Buddha is, and he would sit in front of it cross-legged for about half an hour. Goenkaji says he doesn't know what Baba was doing, what he was practicing, but it felt very peaceful. Initially, Goenkaji and his brother used to go just because they got a ride on an electric tram, and that was a big thrill for them at that time. Later, this young boy, 5 or 7 years old, he used to enjoy sitting next to Baba for a little while before he got bored, and he said that the beautiful, peaceful vibration, the atmosphere around that temple was very attractive to him, and later on it was that same peaceful atmosphere which attracted him to do his first course at Sayagyi Center in Rangoon. At the age of 12, he was put to work in the shop. Of course, he was going to school as well and learning English, and his English was even useful negotiating with suppliers from time to time. At 13, he had a big shock. He was adopted out of his family. And the reason was that Goenkaji's uncle, his father's brother, had 6 daughters but no son. And in those days, for an Indian Hindu family, a son was very important. They were the one who carried on the tradition. So Goenkaji's father said to his brother, "Okay, you can have Goenkaji, you can adopt him." So Goenkaji was adopted out. It wasn't that he was unhappy or that they treated him badly, but he really missed his mother. He was very close to her. An example, even at that young age, occasionally he would get migraines. And when he got a migraine, he would lay his head in his mother's lap, and she would gently massage his head with oil, and he said gradually a tingling sensation would start at the top of his head and go through his whole body, and then he would sleep peacefully in his mother's lap. So he missed his mother badly. But he continued in school, continued in the shop. At 16, he matriculated out of school. He was a bright boy, bright kid, came top of his class, but not only top of his class, it's said that he got the highest marks that year in all Burma. And this was quite remarkable for a young Indian boy. Obviously, he should have gone to university, but he didn't. The family wanted him to continue in the shop, and that's what he did. Two years later, at the age of 18, he married. As was traditional in those days, it was an arranged marriage. Of course, it was to Mataji. And Mataji was the girl next door. She and her family, also Indians from Rajasthan, literally lived in the next door house. And that was now 1942, the middle of the war. The Japanese had invaded, and even during their wedding ceremony, Japanese planes were bombing Mandalay. Very soon afterwards, the family fled, along with 500,000 other Indians. And they took this route, you can see it on that Google map there, across those impenetrable mountains at the top of Burma to Assam. It was a hard journey. Thousands of Indians died on that journey. And this young Goenkaji, 18 years old, and his brother had to take this huge Goenka family across those mountains, because the men all stayed behind for a few days to look after the business. So it was with this 18-year-old boy and his brother. He got them safely and successfully across. He loved travel, but he later said this was the toughest journey he ever had. They settled in southern India during the war, managed to start a business of some kind, and then during the war, after the war, they returned. Now, quite a few other Indians returned, but not all. And things had changed. The myth of British invincibility was gone. The Japanese had conquered Burma, even though they'd been driven out again. Everybody knew that sooner or later independence would come. And many of the Indians were suspicious. Under the British they'd been protected, But what a new nationalist Burmese government would be like, they didn't know. So most of the Burmese tended to just do trading. They had few assets, no fixed assets at all, just their bank accounts, and they would trade in whatever they were trading in so that they could move out quickly if necessary. And that fear, that anticipation, actually later proved to be correct. But Goenkaji's attitude was totally different. He thought to himself, well, if I'm making money out of this country, I should give something back to this country. And so he actually started a factory. And here he is in front of his blanket mill. They used the name Bandula, and that trademark, Bandula, which they started even under Baba's time, was the name of a famous Burmese general who was defeated by the British, and they used it for everything thereafter. And although Goenkaji, of course, was making money out of his factory, he was called the Red Capitalist because his attitude was totally different to most. He actually set up workers' committees. He used to come in and eat with the heads of those committees. He provided playing fields, sports fields. He provided free medical care for his workers. When his workers were sick, he'd go and visit them in their houses. So they called him the Red Capitalist, the Communist Capitalist. And he had this very strong ethic given to him by his Baba, his grandfather. The customer is king, the customer is our benefactor. We should never ever cheat the customer. So he prospered in business, and then it was not only the blanket mill, there was Bandula bran oils, Bandula plastics. He showed a huge flair for business and was busy building what in those days was a massive business empire. But not only that, he was becoming a community leader among the Hindu community. He joined Arya Samaj, which was a Hindu group devoted to examining the Hindu scriptures from a rational, intellectual point of view. And he was with the head of Arya Samaj, which was a Dr. Om Prakash, of which we'll hear about later. Om Prakash later became a teacher under Goenkaji. So at this stage they were colleagues. Om Prakash was the family doctor. They founded an orphanage together, and they founded a Hindu literature society, which used to hold weekly meetings in Rangoon and elsewhere. So Goenkaji was in huge demand, an important person, and as he talks about in his own discourses, all this led to a very big ego and a lot of tension. And we all know from his discourses about his migraines. His doctor, one of them was Om Prakash himself, who was prescribing him morphine by that time. He went abroad. As we know, he came back worse. And then someone else said to him, come and take a course with this man, Sayagyi U Ba Khin. So even when he first went to visit U Ba Khin at his center, Sayagyi could see straight away that this was a man of very deep paramis, a man able to spread Dhamma. So even from that first meeting, Sayagyi knew that Goenkaji sooner or later would be a teacher, and yet he rejected him. The motivation was wrong. It was to cure his migraine. So maybe the first case of special handling. And then Goenkaji went home. He hesitated for some time because of all this strong Hindu conditioning. His brother-in-law had used to say, better die in your own religion, but never go to another one. All that was there. But then finally he decided, yes, I won't become a Buddhist, I will just practice the technique. And Sayagyi had explained to him, it's just going to be Shila, Samadhi, Panya. And he discovered that was the case. He went along, and that course, the date of it, just happened to be the exact anniversary of 2,500 years after the death of Buddha. And he got huge benefits from his first course. He said, I gained something so substantial I had not expected even. My search, my spiritual search was over. He knew what he wanted to do. And a little story from that first course. After he'd taken Vipassana, he was so deep in his meditation that Sayagyi didn't want to disturb him. So he said to a worker, go to his cell, throw a blanket over his head, and lead him blindfold to his room. Don't let him go into the dining room. So he was led blindfold to his room, lying down for a little while. His lunch was brought to him, and he found as he was eating it was just vibration, vibration, vibration. And from then on, he lost all his taste for spicy foods. He was very happy with plain food ever after. The course cured him of his migraines, it took him out of morphine, and he no longer needed sleeping tablets. Now, you probably remember that on day 2 of his course, he wanted to run away. He talks about that. He was packed, ready to go. That's a hard situation to turn round. And he was turned round by this lady, professor of history at Rangoon University, and here she is. This is Dhamma Sain. She's the one on the left, the shorter one. And Dhamma Sain was a very impressive lady, a persuasive lady in her own right. It's said that she became a Sotapanna under Sayagyi. She was also the first Burmese woman ever to attend a university in Britain. So highly educated. And at that time, she was also asked to address the British Parliament on the subject of Burmese independence. And she must have been persuasive because Burma got its independence. So a very remarkable lady. This photo is taken when she was younger, and obviously she's in London. You can see the British policeman behind. Goenkaji, having taken his first course, many different members, almost all the members of his family, started also taking courses with Sayagyi. And this is a rather delightful family photo or group photo, Goenkaji with his family. Now Sayagyi's right in the middle, seated there. You can see Goenkaji to Sayagyi's right, below him. And above Sayagyi, to his right, is Mataji. She's the one just above. Now Mataji, his wife, had waited 4 years before taking a course, but Sayagyi was strongly encouraging her. He said, for your own benefit, and also for Goenkaji's benefit, you should take a course. Again, Sayagyi could no doubt see the paramis there. And when she first came to the course, she was incredibly sick. She was so sick she couldn't eat. And even climbing the stairs to the pagoda at Sayagyi's center, she needed 2 people to help her up the stairs. That's how bad she was. She said after Anapana, all that went away, and she was fine. Now, Mataji didn't speak Burmese, and Sayagyi didn't speak Hindi. So how did he teach her? By gestures, and she responded by gestures. Every evening he'd give a discourse in Burmese, which she couldn't understand, but Goenkaji was there and he'd translate just 5 or 10 minutes. And so that was Mataji's first course. And thereafter she was regularly at the center, often used to bring the children as well when there wasn't a course on. Another person to note is the old lady in white, right up, top left. That was Goenkaji's aunt, his adopted mother. She became a very serious student of Sayagyi's. Sayagyi would give a course once a month. Every month she'd go to that course, 10 days or 30 days, the bags would be packed and she'd be off. So a very Dhamma lady. Goenkaji was living in a real Dhamma household. Later on she passed away uncomplainingly of very painful liver cancer. And there's this quote from Mataji talking about Sayagyi. I felt very peaceful with him, but also there was something overwhelming about him. Now, the fears of the Indian community were realized in 1962. There was a military coup. The generals took over Burma, and that was General Ne Win, and they started a program of expulsion of the Indians in Burma. And something like 300,000 Indians fled out of Burma at that time. The population, Indian population, was massively reduced. And the Burmese government, when expelling them, gave them the grand sum of 175 kyats, which was nothing for their travel, the Indian government was having to arrange airlifting and taking them out by sea. That poisoned relations between India and Burma for a long time thereafter. Goenkaji stayed. He continued his business. But in 1963, he was summoned to the military office. And this was now a program of nationalization by the military junta. And Goenkaji was summarily informed that all his assets were nationalized. So in one stroke, he lost his property, he lost his blanket mill, he lost all his bank accounts, he was left with nothing. And he walked out of the office, and as he walked out, a poem, a verse came into his mind. When the jaggery is there, jaggery, as you know, is brown sugar, you have to endure the buzzing of the flies. When there's no more jaggery, you don't have to worry about the flies anymore. He'd lost his wealth, he didn't have to worry about the flies. He felt actually relieved of a burden. He went straight back home, started working on a dissertation on some of Buddha's early tales. That evening, he went round to Sayagyi, the group sit at the center as usual. He came in smiling. Sayagyi knew what had happened. He looked at him and said, "Your vipassana has been successful. You've gone through this test and you've kept your equanimity." Actually, worse was to come, because the military government then seriously entertained a proposal to put on a show trial of the top 10 Indian industrialists in Burma and execute them. And number one on that list was Goenkaji. Some of the other industrialists went insane, some committed suicide. Goenkaji remained smiling, he kept his equanimity, and luckily the Burmese government gave up the idea. When he was having his blanket mill nationalized, a colonel arrived with some soldiers to take over. Goenkaji was there, and he said, "Look, may I just give a final address to my workers?" And luckily the colonel was kind. He was a kindly man. He said, "All right, but just be very careful what you say." And Goenkaji addressed them, and essentially he gave them a Dhamma talk. And he said, "Look, this blanket mill, it's a tree of merits. It's merits for us all. I've gained merit, you've gained merit, and now you have new owners, but I don't want you to stop working here. I don't want you to slack off on your efforts in any way. Give the new government just as much service as you gave me." The workers were very touched, and when Goenkaji looked round, he saw the colonel had tears in his eyes. And what followed was 4 or 5 golden years with Sayagyi. Now he had no responsibilities. In the old days, he used to go to work in his latest model, luxury executive car, who knows whether it was a BMW or a Rolls Royce or whatever, and he'd just be reading his business papers in the back, totally preoccupied. All that was gone now, and he'd be traveling on crowded buses, standing or sitting, just being with Anicca, totally happy. And Sayagyi used to say to him, "All right, now I want you to read this discourse of the Buddhas." He'd read it overnight, he'd come in, discuss with Sayagyi, say, "This is my interpretation," and Sayagyi would either say, "Yes, that's good," or correct him very kindly, and then say, "Go and meditate." And Goenkaji would go off and meditate on the discourse, and felt he understood it much deeper. And he used to say, he felt as if Buddha was talking direct to him. He talks about that later. Now, there was a verse which Sayagyi used to recite from time to time. The Pali is above, but the meaning of it is, "By the merits of these deeds, may I never be associated with the ignorant. May I always be associated with the wise until I gain Nibbana." And Goenkaji used to hear Sayagyi reciting that, so he started reciting it. And one day, Sayagyi came round to his house and heard him, and stopped him. He said, "Oh, no, this is not for you. I am just on the cusp of the new sasana of Buddha's teachings, and I'm so busy with my civil service work, I don't have time to teach a lot of people, so I just take a very few people with very high paramis. But you will have to deal with the masses, with the ignorant. And of course the ignorant is us. And so it was left to Goenkaji to teach those very large numbers. And Sayagyi already knew that Goenkaji was being a teacher and was training him. He used to use Goenkaji as a translator whenever Indian students came. In 1967, some years later, Sayagyi retired from work and then decided that he'd take a Dhamma trip and give campsite courses up north, one in Mandalay, one in Maimyo. He took Goenkaji. Again, Goenkaji didn't realize, but he was being trained. Now, of course, the vibration at Sayagyi Center was so beautiful, so smooth, but now these were rough campsite courses. Mandalay was on the top of a building between two cinemas, both blaring out their soundtracks, and it was just bamboo matting on the roof, and that's how the course was held. Another one at Maimyo, and Goenkaji was there, Sayagyi was there, and suddenly at discourse time, Sayagyi says, "Oh, all these people, mostly they're Indians, you give the discourse." And so Goenkaji was just thrown right in, sitting on the cot next to Sayagyi. And he'd start talking. He was used to public talking, but not to giving a Dhamma discourse. And at first he was pretty unnerved, but Sayagyi was there. And then Sayagyi would lean over and say, "Okay, now talk about Angulimala. Now talk about Mother Vishaka. Now talk about this. Now talk about that." And so Goenkaji was being coached about how to give discourses. Later on, back at IMC, there was a small course once for 3 Indian students. Anapana was about to be given. Goenkaji was there as usual. Sayagyi said, "Oh, I'm going to go and rest. You give Anapana." And so Goenkaji was thrown right in, giving live Anapana. Come Vipassana time, Sayagyi said, "Oh, I'm going to rest again. You give Vipassana." And so suddenly there was Goenkaji giving Vipassana live himself. And in the middle of Vipassana, one of the 3 Indian students started shaking violently. Goenkaji was quite unnerved. He thought, what am I going to do now? And he thought, shall I run and get Sayagyi? And then he thought, no, Dhamma's with me, Sayagyi's vibrations are with me, his metta's with me. He started sending strong metta. The student settled down, the shaking stopped, and Vipassana went beautifully. So that was Goenkaji's training, Anapana, Vipassana, and the discourses. And then, as you see, Goenkaji was about to go to India to teach his mother Vipassana. He wanted to help her because she, when she went to India, had not been able to practice. Although she was a student of Sayagyi's, she'd essentially lost her practice, and she'd become very worried about Goenkaji and the family in India, with all the military government and all that, and essentially lost the peace of her mind. As Goenkaji puts it, she had some psychic trouble. And just before Goenkaji left, he meditated in the central room with Sayagyi. Sayagyi came out and announced him as a teacher, a full Vipassana teacher. And he gave him a certificate. And this is the certificate. When we're appointed these days, we don't get a certificate. We just get an announcement somewhere, 1 sentence. But here it is, the full certificate. This is to announce that Satyanarayan Goenka has been trained under me in proper methods, theory and practice, and he is now a fully authorized teacher, Sayagyi U Ba Khin. And Goenkaji was very nervous. Sayagyi was saying, oh, he's so pleased Goenkaji was going to India. And he says, you're not going, I'm going. Dhamma is going. Dhamma will spread unto you. Goenkaji was very nervous, and Sayagyi would upbraid him and say, look, why do you think it's you going? This is Dhamma going, you're just a vehicle. And Sayagyi also said that when he went over, he said nature would give some sign that it was pleased. So the next day, Goenkaji left. He flew from Rangoon to Calcutta. As he stepped down from the plane, there was an earth tremor which was felt throughout northern India. So that was a good sign, as if nature was pleased. But then he went to Bombay, where his family was, and he found nothing but misery and darkness. His mother was in a bad way. And he'd been counting on his family to help him set up the first course. And he discovered that very recently they'd all given up Vipassana and they'd started practicing Ananda Marga, totally different technique, and they weren't interested in even talking about Vipassana. How could he ask them to help him in any way? So there he was in this really bad situation, darkness all around, wondering what to do. And of course he'd gone over to help his mother and his father, and they weren't coming at it. One day he meditates, feels this darkness all around, but he realizes his mind is actually totally unaffected. He's fully equanimous. And then he just starts sending strong metta. He comes out feeling much better, and there's someone waiting for him at the door, Vijay Adukya, an old family acquaintance. And Vijay Adukya says, I hear you want to give a course. I have a site for you. Would you like to come and look at it? So he's taken off to this Panchavati Dharamsala public rest house in Bombay, which Vijay Adukya has secured for him. The place is full of filth, dust. It's absolutely filthy. It's all amidst the din and noise of Mumbai. Goenkaji looks at it, but he realizes how tough it is to get anywhere to go, and he says, I'll take it. So now he had a campsite, and then all these people started saying, oh, I'll take the course. Mostly family members, but also others. I'll take the course, I'll take the course. And suddenly there were 10 or 12 people all saying, yeah, we'll take the course. So he knew there was going to be a course on, but his father and his mother were still holding out, and he was feeling really sad because he'd come over actually to give Dhamma to his mother. And then a thought came to him. He started again sending strong metta, and he remembered that when his father had taken a course with Sayagyi, the father was into Ananda Marga at this time, and into rites and rituals. Sayagyi had agreed with the father that he could just put aside his rites and rituals, someone else could do them for him while he took the course. And Goenkaji went to his father and said, well, why don't you do the same again? Just all your Ananda Marga rites and rituals, someone else can do them for you during the 10 days, and you sit. And his dad agreed. That left his mother. She saw that his father was sitting, and she said, well, she'd been really concerned that she would upset her younger son, who was into Ananda Marga, if she took a course with Goenkaji. But she said, all right, well, I'll come for 5 days. So the course was on. Now, this Dharamsala, totally unsuitable. It had a big hall, and it did have a room at the very top which a teacher could use, but the staircase to access it went straight through the female dormitories. And for Goenkaji, that was completely unworkable. So he said, all right, well, we'll just put a cloth at the end of the hall behind the Dhamma seat, and he slept and rested behind that cloth. The students were in the main part of the hall. And very few toilets. The students had to queue for toilets. Goenkaji had to use the same entrance as the students. And when he needed to use the toilet, he would simply ask the management, is there a toilet free now? So that was the conditions under which he was conducting this course. At first it went okay. And then about day 5, his personal assistant, Yadav, who became his lifelong personal assistant, started vomiting, as did a whole lot of the students. And Goenkaji couldn't work it out. He checked the food seemed okay. He got a doctor in. The doctor said, well, there's actually nothing wrong with them all, they're just vomiting. And then, as Yadav tells the story himself, Goenkaji came to him, and Goenkaji said, are you practicing something else? And Yadav said, yes, I'm doing Ananda Marga. And Goenkaji said, well, that is completely impossible here. You can't do that on a 10-day course. So long discussion. Yadav was very attached to his Ananda Marga practice, but finally he agreed, I'll give it up. Goenkaji taught him Anapana. He practiced that for the rest of the course, took Vipassana later, and after that the course went just swimmingly. His mother got huge benefit, and after that all the other courses started. And here's just a sample list from the first few courses. The second course was in Chennai, former Madras. And that was organized by his brother, who was actually an Ananda Magi. But the brother raised no objection and even sent his wife on the course. Not a big course, but he arranged public talks for Goenkaji. And then the fourth course is an interesting one. That was given at Sarnath. Now, Sayagyi was encouraging Goenkaji all the time and very pleased that it would be in Sarnath, because Sarnath was where the Buddha had given his first discourse. But there was a problem. Almost all the students on the course would be monks. And of course, dana was needed, or money was needed to finance the courses. Goenkaji felt he couldn't ask his family any more for money, so big problem, how will the course be financed? The students were there, the site was there. And then again, the thought came in his mind, I'm just a medium. It's not my problem to sort this out. Dhamma will sort this out. So he just decided to go. As he left his house, getting into the taxi, Vimala comes to see him. Vimala is his sister-in-law, the wife of his brother, cousin brother, Radhesham. And she hands him a textile bag, cloth bag, full of coins. And she says, please take this. And the family was poor at that time. They'd lost everything in Burma, and this was her entire household savings. Saved carefully, penny by penny, over months or years. Take it, use this for the course. So the course was financed. Radhesham and Vimala later became very close. They became teachers themselves, and they taught Goenkaji. Taught with Goenkaji. Another course, number 12, Ajmer. You'll see there were 2 old students on that course and 2 new students. An organizer from Ajmer wrote to Goenkaji in flowery language, saying what a wonderful course this would be and how he'd get so many students. And Goenkaji was taken in by the language and agreed to come. And so he travelled with Yadav, as they always did, 3rd class, sleeper class on the train. And in the train, there was just one other person in their compartment, an old Indian sadhu, an ascetic, who was travelling nowhere in particular. And he and Goenkaji got talking about meditation. Goenkaji mentioned a meditation course was going to start the next day. And the sadhu expressed his interest. He said, oh, I'd like to do that. And he was quite free. So when they got to Ajmer, they got off. The organizer was there to meet them. The sadhu came with them. And then it turned out that the organizer had not been able to secure any campsite in Ajmer. All the people there had heard this was a Buddhist practice, and they wouldn't rent their dharamsalas. So finally, the organizer had found an empty dharamsala in a small village a little way out of Ajmer. And so he took them there. But because of the last-minute change, there were no students. All the people who might have come to Ajmer had not applied, so it was just the 4 of them, Goenkaji, Yadav, the organizer, and the sadhu. So 2 students. And this site was a horrible sight. No toilets, no running water. The place was empty, pretty run down. And so for a toilet, it had been organized. There was a dry canal behind the building. Over that was a concrete platform, and a 4-foot-high matting enclosure screen had been erected, just enough for privacy. That was the toilet. A bamboo matting had been erected for showers in the courtyard. It wasn't very private. Goenkaji said, don't worry, I'll just go and I'll go and bathe by the well. And the watchman used to bring water from the well, and he'd do all the cooking. Goenkaji was not abashed at all. He said, okay, well, there's only 2 of you, let's make it 4 of us. Yadav and I will sit a self-course. So he sat a self-course. In the evening, he'd give discourses to the sadhu and the organizer. And so the course went like that. Day 7, the organizer leaves because he has to go to a conference in Sri Lanka. So now they're down to 3. But it was a very good course. At the end of it, the sadhu was thrilled. He said, I've spent 12 years in the Himalayas, but that was nothing. It was useless time compared to what I've gained in these 10 days. So they all went back happy. Now another course, number 17, at Sadra, near Ahmedabad. Again, an interesting example of the conditions Goenkaji was working under. Something like 20 students on the course, and this was a very poor village. Goenkaji arrives there, again a very rough site. No management, no cooks, nothing. So the people who were taking the course, they said, well, look, don't worry, we'll do the cooking. After checking in the mornings, we'll go and light a fire, and we'll make the lunch, and we'll bring you lunch. So that's how it happened. And Goenkaji knew how poor these people were, so he said to Yadav, don't ask anything from them. So the first day, lunch comes, Yadav brings it, 1 boiled vegetable, a few half-burnt rotis, for salad, half an onion, a little buttermilk. That was it. And later they come to him and they say, oh, Goenkaji, we're so sorry about the food. We're very poor. We can't afford anything else. And he says, look, don't you worry about me. You just carry on with your meditation. Your food was delicious. It had your metta in it. I'm quite comfortable here. Don't worry about me. And that was how the course went. And so course after course, and all the time encouragement from Sayagyi. Now, in these very early days, there were very few Westerners coming to the courses, but they had started to come, and Goenkaji would just give them 5 or 10 minutes instructions, and that was it. But after a while, as the numbers started increasing, they said, well, look, we want a course, and you can speak English. Come and give us a course in English. And Goenkaji refused. He said, no, my English isn't good enough. I can't possibly do that. So they took it. They escalated it. They went to Sayagyi and said, look, this man is refusing to give us a course. Please say something. And so Sayagyi sent the message you see below. You must go. They'd organized a course. They'd rented a villa at Dalhousie, just 11 of them. You must go. Your English will be good enough. Dhamma will be fine. And Goenkaji was actually quite happy to go to Dalhousie. It was in the Himalayas. He was just very concerned about his English. So Anapana was given. Come the discourse on the first night. He sits on the Dhamma seat and he feels this horrible vibration. He feels as if he's being suffocated on the Dhamma seat. All he can manage is 15 minutes of a discourse and then he has to stop. Next day, same feeling. He manages 25 minutes at this time, but still feeling completely suffocated. There's something very wrong, some horrible vibration from somewhere which he can't work out. Day 3, he goes round checking the students, and he goes to the room of the course organizer, which happened to be next to the Dhamma hall. When he goes in, he finds on the table a skull and a bloody knife, a kukri, a Gurkha knife. And he said, what's this? And the organizer said, oh well, before I came, my old guru said, you should do an animal sacrifice. And having sacrificed that animal, you should bring the skull and the bloody knife with you, keep it in your room, and your meditation will be very good. And so Goenkaji said, well, this is not workable. You have to get rid of this. Long argument, but finally the organizer agreed. He took that skull, he took that knife, and put them in a cave a long way away. Now day 3 discourse. Suddenly all that feeling of suffocation was gone. He felt clear vibrations straight through the top of his head, and he gives a flawless, perfect 1-hour discourse in perfect English. Fluent. Afterwards, long instructions, and he looks at the students at 9 p.m. that night. They're all wrapped deep in meditation. And then the course went very well. After that, this is a photo of them after the course, all looking very happy. And after that, all the courses were bilingual. He'd give one discourse in the morning. As far as I remember, it was Hindi in the morning, English in the evening, and that was every course. And more Westerners started coming. Some courses, there was even a majority of Westerners by now, particularly the ones around the sacred sites, like Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha got enlightened, Sarnath and so forth. This is a photo from a course in Bodh Gaya, and pretty rough in those days. You can see Goenkaji didn't have much space around him, and apparently there was very little segregation of males and females, and not assigned seating like these days. We have all little name tags and assigned seating and all that. None of that. You just went straight in and grabbed the best seat you could as fast as you could. And that's what they did. And now another problem with the Western students. Most of them were hippies. They'd come from the West, seeking some kind of spiritual search. They were usually dirty, they were unwashed, they had long hair, they were often addicted to drugs and sexually promiscuous, all deeply shocking to the Indians. And so, of course, in those days, no internet, nothing like that. All applications were made by mail, and you wrote in, you got an application form, you filled it out, mailed it back, and the organizers started sending out this notice to the Western students. This is an actual notice kept by a Western student. And it says, please be clean, please wash. Don't bring lice to the course. Every day in summer, wash yourselves, wash your clothes. And then a little paragraph underneath, because in India, any kind of public physical contact, even between a married couple, is very shocking in public. And here were these Westerners kissing, hugging, holding hands, giving each other massages, all that kind of thing. So that was very emphatic, you don't do that on a course. And so here he was dealing with these pretty rough Western students. And he used to say later that when I look back at those early Western students, and I see them now, many of them teachers, assistant teachers, I feel so pleased seeing where they've come from. In 1971, Sayagyi had been encouraging him all this time, and Sayagyi passes away. And it was very sudden. He was only taken into hospital 2 days earlier. He had been suffering from various diseases of old age. He dies of internal hemorrhaging. Goenkaji is giving a course at that time. He gets a telegram saying his teacher's dead, passed away. Big shock for Mataji also, who's still in Burma. And he announces that night at group sitting, the light of Dhamma has gone out. Soon after that, he takes a 10-day self-course. And during the self-course, he decides that from now on, he'll give up all his family responsibilities, all his business he'll hand over to his family, and devote himself full-time to Dhamma service. And he writes to his family, says this, and his brothers all reply very positively, saying, yes, please do that. Don't worry, we'll look after things. And his cousin brother Radhesham, who he's brought up with, and a younger brother, specially make a trip out to Bodh Gaya to see him, to reassure him, don't worry, we'll look after it. We'll look after all the business, we'll support you. You just keep giving the courses. But actually, of course, he didn't lose his connection with Sayagyi. And there's this beautiful quote where he says, wherever I give Dhamma, I feel that Sayagyi is there, his metta is with me wherever I am. But now he got reinforcements. Mataji had been living in Burma all this time, this last 2.5 years, she'd been waiting. She wanted to be with Goenkaji, but she had 4 sons, big family in Burma, 2 of the sons were in India, and she had all her household duties as head of the house in Goenkaji's absence. And there is some very sweet correspondence which has been preserved between them. This is some of it, this is just an excerpt. Mataji writing to him saying, how I wish I could be with you, how I wish I could support you. And Goenkaji saying, yes, one day it will happen, it will happen. But also Goenkaji is writing, same correspondence, and saying to Mataji in the early years, maybe it's better you're not here, because the conditions are so rough, it would be very hard for you. But now finally she's out here, she's with him, and a huge support for Goenkaji, not only with her metta and her meditation next door to him, but also because there were so many gurus in India, and some of them had pretty dubious reputations, and many of the Indians did not like to send their daughters or their wives to anything given by, any retreat given by any guru. Of course, Goenkaji was different, but the Indians didn't know that. And now suddenly, Goenkaji's wife was there, and they realized, oh, that's fine, it's perfectly safe. Goenkaji was protected, and the students were protected. So a huge support for Goenkaji. The next year, a campsite course, he's asked to give one at the Mahatma Gandhi ashram by some close followers of Mahatma Gandhi. Of course, Gandhi's dead long ago, but his followers were very interested in practicing. The course went very well. Now, the leading disciple of Gandhi, reputedly a saint, widely revered in India, was Vinoba Bhave. Vinoba Bhave didn't actually attend the course. And afterwards, Goenkaji met him, explained what he was doing, and Vinoba Bhave was very skeptical. He said, I don't believe this. Only God can make these changes. And he threw Goenkaji a challenge. He said, all right, well, if you can give Dhamma to rough, undisciplined school children, and if you can give it to hardened criminals, then I'll believe you. Now, the hardened criminals had to wait because Goenkaji didn't have the ability to organize a prison course at that time. But the school kids, yes. And Vinoba Bhave organized a course in his own school, the school he looked after. And these were really rough street kids, totally undisciplined, abuse and filthy language in every sentence. The course was given. After that, they were reformed characters. No more bad language. And Vinoba Bhave was pretty satisfied, and he said, all right, now what about the prisoners? That came later. And now the courses were getting much bigger. Instead of these early courses of 14 people, 20 people, they were now 80 or 100. Here's a typical photo after a course. There's Goenkaji, Mataji by his side. Again, Sayagyi is advising him, radiate with metta at the end of each course. But huge pressure on him. And you can see also there Westerners and Indians mixed. Very nice. But because of the pressure he's under, now they don't leave him alone. So a new notice goes out with the confirmation letters. And here it is. Basically, the message is, give your teacher a break. When he's finished checking in the mornings, don't pursue him straight to his room, however important your question may be. Give him 15 minutes before group sets to rest and relax. Interviews, please stop promptly at 1 o'clock. Don't go on. Be very mindful. Keep it short. Keep it to the point. Questions every night would go until 10 o'clock. We're pretty lucky we don't have to deal with that. And they said, look, just stop at 10 o'clock. Give him a break. So that was sent out, and a very sweet note at the bottom saying this also applies to the course organizers. Because otherwise the course organizers and managers would say, the students are gone now, so we can ask our questions. So that's an indication of the pressure he was under. And Sayagyi was saying to him, or had said to him, really, you need a center. A place where you can rest, where you can relax, and also where students can take longer courses, more serious courses. And now this is 1973, and one day he's traveling by car, he's coming back from a campsite course from Deolali, which is near Nasik, back to Mumbai. And he's traveling through a small village on the way called Igatpuri. And he's flagged down by a shopkeeper called Bojraj and his assistant. The car's flagged down. Goenkaji is not very pleased at the car being flagged down. And they say, oh, sir, you need a center. We've got some sites for you. Please come and have a look. And Goenkaji was particularly not pleased because he had a broken leg at the time and his leg was in plaster. And there they were asking him to walk around sites. But he did. They looked at 2 sites, totally unsuitable. And then finally they said, well, there is another one up this rather disused path. And there it is. You can see it. A few mango trees, some old abandoned buildings, which goats now inhabited, dating from the British Raj. Totally run down. Nothing around. Goenkaji walks up there, closes his eyes for a few moments, and says, yes, this will do. This can be a center. And another student is with him called Ratilal Mehta. Ratilal Mehta immediately says, I'll buy the land. So there was Dhammagiri on the road, as it were. Ratilal Mehta also donated another center on his own property in Hyderabad later, which actually became the first operating center even before Dhammagiri. But Dhammagiri, of course, was far bigger. And now these rough Westerners started coming to Dhammagiri. This was 1974, 1975. There was nothing there. There was no water, no toilets, no food, intermittent electricity, no phone. But these Westerners, they were used to rough conditions. They came along and they said, well, okay, Goenkaji, what will we do? We're here now. And he said, meditate, meditate, meditate. Clean yourselves and then clean the center. So for water, they'd go down to the well at the bottom of the hill. They'd bring up buckets of water and scrub the center down. For food, they'd go into the village and get food. Electricity was sometimes. And for a toilet, they'd use the north-facing slope, a very well-ventilated toilet, totally open. And because they looked a bit rough, and because of these sensibilities of the village, Goenkaji laid down certain rules. No women to stay on the center overnight. They had to go back to the village and stay in hotels. And all the men to be clean-shaven and to wear white pants. And here's two of them. One is Narayan, who became the center manager of Dhammagiri, and the other is our own Graham Gamby, formerly an assistant teacher in Australia, former husband of Anne Gamby. And here is a description by a Canadian student of the conditions. The place was overrun by snakes, spiders, large centipedes, all kinds of horrible things. And as he sweetly puts it, a little bit of samasati, a little bit of right awareness at night could save your life. So that was the conditions they were working under. Now we move back to Vinoba Bhave's challenge and a different scene. This is now 1975. And a new student comes on the course called Ram Singh. Now Ram Singh later became number 2, second to Goenkaji in the whole organization. He was a senior civil servant. He was actually Home Secretary of the state of Rajasthan, the most senior civil servant in Rajasthan. And his wife had migraines. And some friends said, oh, if your wife's got migraines, you should go and take one of these courses which Goenkaji is giving. He cured his migraines like that. And Ram Singh, being a senior civil servant, had heard all about these guru trips, not necessarily Goenkaji's ones, but other ones, and they had a pretty dubious reputation. He said, no, I don't want to go to that. Don't think you should go. And she said, no, I want to go, and I will only go if you go with me. So Ram Singh was trapped. He had to go. At the end of the course, of course, he gets a huge amount out of the course. And he goes to Goenkaji and he says, look, I'm a civil servant in Rajasthan. I've heard about this challenge about prisoners. I can organize a prison course for you in Rajasthan. And so it happened. And this course was given at Jaipur Central Jail. Something like 100 students on the course. And 5 conditions were set by Goenkaji for the jail course. And here they are. The prisoners must have fresh linen, fresh clothes, decent, simple food, no locks, chains, no guards, exemption from hard labor, and 10 female prisoners should also take the course. Now, the jail superintendent was extremely dubious about the last one. He said, look, these men have been in forced celibacy for years. You let 10 women among them, who knows what will happen? But Ram Singh was Home Secretary. He was very senior. He used his authority. He said, no, that's the condition, that's it. Very reluctantly, the superintendent said, okay. And then Ram Singh added another condition. He said every evening during the discourse, because the number of prisoners taking the course was not that great, but there were 1,000 prisoners in the jail, it was a big jail. He said every evening, I want all 1,000 prisoners to be able to come out into the open compound and listen to the discourse. And the superintendent was shocked. He said, how can we possibly do that? Every day there are disturbances, sometimes riots. We try to keep them all separate all the time. You let 1,000 of them out together, who knows what will happen? Ram Singh insisted, and so it was done. So Anapana was about to start. Goenkaji's there, prisoners are all sat down. The very back of the hall, 2 prisoners are led in chains. Goenkaji looks at them and said, what's this? I can't give Dhamma to someone in chains. And then the superintendent explains, look, these men are multiple murderers. They're on death row. They've got nothing to lose. Any of them could decide to try to make a hero of themselves by killing you or Ram Singh or any of the senior officials here. We can't take that risk. Goenkaji stuck to his guns, said, I'm not giving Anapana until those men are taken out of chains. So finally, a compromise was reached. 2 soldiers with guns were put at the front of the hall with orders to shoot if those 2 men got up and did anything. Anapana went just fine. Nothing happened. The next day the discourse was given, the 1,000 men assembled, no problem. The course carried through, and during the entire course there was no disturbance whatsoever, even though previously there would typically be 15 or 20 incidents every day in the jail. During that time there were none. 3 studies were done, research studies were done on the prisoners, all showed huge positive benefits, lowered blood pressure, they gave up smoking, changes in attitude, all that. And from then on, the government of Rajasthan adopted Vipassana as an official program in its jail courses. And now, back to Dhammagiri. Construction had started. This was now 1976, and here's a lovely photo of Goenkaji with Sri Ram Taparia on the left and Shyam Sundar, his younger brother, on the right. And it looks like they're having a picnic on the construction site. Now, Sri Ram Taparia was a very early student of Goenkaji, and he was possibly the only Goenkaji student who ever in those days went over and actually visited Sayagyi in Rangoon also. Sayagyi met him and strongly encouraged him to support Goenkaji in what he's doing. Sri Ram Taparia, as a result of that, founded the Sayagyi U Ba Khin Memorial Trust, which was the legal body which owned the Dhammagiri land. He oversaw the first phase of construction at Dhammagiri, and he also served as a manager on many of Goenkaji's early courses. So here they are having a picnic together, and construction went on apace. And then they were getting ready, and then there was a problem. The residence had been built, just a small residence for Goenkaji, not the big one later, but they ran out of money, and they had not been able to pay the contractors. And when Goenkaji heard this, he refused to stay in the residence. He said, no, I'm not staying there until it's paid. And so they set up a screen at the end of the female dormitory. He and Mataji stayed behind that. No plumbing. They bathed behind some bamboo matting outside, and they shared the common toilets with all the students. And that went on for 6 months until the residence was paid off. And then there was the first 10-day course at Dhammagiri. There had been an old student course earlier, but this was a 10-day course. And that, of course, is not the main hall of Dhammagiri today. That's now a dining room. But there we have Goenkaji giving a course, 89 students. And at the end of that course, Goenkaji made a very important announcement. He said, from now on, all my courses will be on a dana basis. I will never again charge for courses. And you remember how he talks in his 10-day discourses about how the trustees were all so worried about what would happen. But he stuck to it, and of course it was very successful. That first course was the point at which he announced it. And then the courses continued, course after course. And something else Goenkaji wanted to do was build a pagoda so that people could meditate seriously. And here he is on the pagoda plateau with Mataji going around giving metta. And there he is laying the foundation stone of the pagoda, again with Mataji in the background. And there it is under construction. And there it is finished. That was in 1979. And when it was finished, Goenkaji gave a public talk. A lot of people came. And where he's sitting, you can see he and Mataji are viewed from the back there. They were sitting on a raised dais, which is where the main meditation hall is today. So that was the inauguration of the pagoda. Dhammagiri was now set up. It was running. Dhamma was well established in India. So for these first 10 years, from 1969 to 1979, he conducted 165 courses with an average roughly of 100 students per course. The Ganges of Dhamma had started flowing in his land of origin. And now his mind was turning to the West, to the spread of Dhamma outside India. Very early, in one of his very early courses, a Western student had come. She wasn't the first Western student, but very early. The first Western student was a monk, actually, at Sarnath. But she came and said, please, Goenkaji, I'd like to invite you out to France, to my native country, to give a course there. And at that time, Goenkaji said, wait 10 years. Now 10 years was up. She came back with another invitation. And Goenkaji started thinking about, how can I do this? And his Burmese passport was only endorsed for one country, which was India. And it was government policy never to endorse Burmese passports for more than one country. So he made a special plea. He wrote to the ambassador, asked him, made an application to have endorsement for more countries. The ambassador would not even forward it to Burma. So then he talked to a friend of his, who was very senior in the Burmese government, or had been, and the friend said, well, look, the head of the government at that time, the president of Burma, of the military government, was a man named Colonel Mong Mong, who was actually a personal friend of Goenkaji's. So Goenkaji made a direct appeal to him, can I please have an endorsement to go to more countries? Mong Mong didn't even reply. He later said, look, I cannot change government policy on this. So Goenkaji consulted with his friend again, and his friend gave him some advice. It was this. He said, all right, you can't get a Burmese passport, that's clear. Why not try and get an Indian passport and take a Satya Adhitthana? What's a Satya Adhitthana? Satya means truth, Adhitthana means determination. Those of you who've taken long courses will have heard of a Satya Kriya, a declaration of truth. And his declaration of truth was that throughout all these 10 years that I've been serving, giving courses in India, it has never been for any personal motivation whatsoever. It has always just been to repay the debt of gratitude to my teacher and for the sake of others so that they could get Dhamma. And by the power of this truth, if Dhamma wills it, may I get an Indian passport after 10 years? And he then put in the application for the Indian passport. And the application got stuck. Nothing happened. Why? Because Goenkaji's brothers, 2 of them, were closely involved with Ananda Marga, and Ananda Marga had a very doubtful reputation for political violence. Not necessarily that they did, but the Indian government regarded them with extreme suspicion. And here were Goenkaji's brothers involved in it. They'd actually been put behind bars during the Mrs. Gandhi's reign in India, during the emergency. They were now out, but here they were, his brothers, and Goenkaji's sons were trading with them. So the intelligence department of the Indian government had Goenkaji under surveillance, and they could not believe that he was giving courses just to spread Dhamma. They thought there must be some motivation here. Maybe it's a cover for Ananda Marga. They were even sending their officials as spies on his courses. One official came to him and said, look, confessed at the end of the course, look, I was sent here as a spy to see what you were doing, but now I've realized that what you're doing is totally pure, and I will go back and I will say that to my seniors. And he said several others have also said the same thing, but the seniors wouldn't believe him. They could not believe that Goenkaji was just doing that. So the application was totally stuck. And in the meantime, relying on the power of this adhitthana, Goenkaji had agreed to give courses outside India. He'd agreed with this Tara Mikhail to give 2 courses in France. He was going to give 1 in Canada, 2 in England. The campsites were booked, the students were booked, expensive campsites, and the first course was going to start on the 1st of July. 22nd of June is the anniversary of 10 years after he arrives in India. Application still stuck for citizenship. The 23rd passes away, the 24th passes away, the 25th, the 26th, and suddenly he gets a phone call, completely out of the blue. Come along to the court at Bombay tomorrow, collect your citizenship papers. So suddenly something has happened. Even then, he's totally pessimistic, because even if you're a citizen, a passport application typically takes weeks or months, and then what about the visa? He goes along, picks up his citizenship papers, he and Mataji. As they leave the courthouse, the travel agent's waiting with a passport application. He says, look, just fill this in on the spot right now. I'll deal with it. So they write it out. The travel agent goes off with the application. The next day, he comes to Goenkaji's house with the passport. And stamped inside it is a visa for a visit to France. So this is now the 29th of June, and his flight is that night. Now, what happened? 3 or 4 days back, Goenkaji's 3rd son, Murari, and his wife, Vatsala, were talking to Vatsala's maternal uncle, Mr. Muraka, Sri Muraka. Now, Muraka was a very senior member of the Indian government. He was a cabinet minister and a close friend of the Prime Minister of that time, Morarji Desai. And they were talking about all this trouble Goenkaji was having with his passport, his citizenship, and his visa. And Muraka says, look, I'll go and talk to Morarji about this. This doesn't sound right to me. So he flies straight away, goes to Delhi, and talks to his close friend, Morarji Desai, the Prime Minister. There's a photo of Morarji Desai there. And Murari says, all right, well, look, let's get his file up. So he brings up the file, calls for the file, and he says, oh, this is with the intelligence department. He's under surveillance. I can't do anything. And then Muraka eyeballs him, and he says, look, what more are you going to find out about this man? You've had him under surveillance for a long time. He's done nothing wrong. And do you think we would have let our daughter marry into this family without making inquiries? Maharaji Desai was dumbfounded. He thought, yes, all right. So he immediately gave an order that the file would be closed. Prime Minister's order. And then Moraka says to him, well, look, this man has to leave in 3 or 4 days. So Maharaji Desai says, okay, so an order comes from the Prime Minister's department, do everything you need to do to get that passport and get that visa on time. And so on the 29th of June, Goenkaji flies out. He arrives in France on the 30th. And on the 1st of July, the course begins in France. And here he is at the end of the first course in France. That's Bill Hart on the left, who managed that course. And here's Goenkaji and Mataji looking very happy. And on the right there is Tara Mikkel, the lady who organized it. But that is another story, the spread of Dhamma outside India. And that is for another day. Thank you.